get us started, I want to reflect on an upcoming book that was written by David Cole, who's a Georgetown University law professor. And he has an excerpt of his book out called Where Liberty Lies, Civil Society and Individual Rights After 9/11. And his book focuses really on the United States. He's a lawyer. But I think it's important for us to think about the theme of his book and try as a way to try and put ourselves in the shoes of Afghans and to understand that we have a very stable government, and yet the challenges for us as civil society have been enormous since 9/11. And so here's what I want to share from David. And he's talking about the post-9/11 role of civil society groups in the United States to curtail government excess. And what he finds is that restraints, for the most part, were imposed not by the formal mechanisms of checks and balances, but by more informal influences, often sparked by efforts of civil society organizations that advocated, educated, organized, demonstrated, and litigated for constitutional and human rights. And I used that as perhaps a stepping stone for us to think about the challenges that Afghans are facing, and that as a way to welcome the remarks from our colleagues in Kabul. Over to you, Michael.
Thanks very much, Peter, and thanks to all for tuning in, and thanks for everybody here for participating. Everybody that's online, in any case, has access to the bios of each of the participants, so I don't want to take too much time with that. But for those on the phone or who don't have easy access to the bios, I'm just going to give a brief overview of each person's background, their current activities. First, just to say that I've been working in Afghanistan since 2009, or community-supported film has been. And CS Film's mission has been to work on mentoring and training folks, storytellers around documentary filmmaking, and producing collections of films that then can help primarily people on the outside see Afghanistan from a different perspective than the dominant one in the Western media, which is really Afghanistan as a battlefront, and Afghanistan from the perspective of what outsiders are doing here. And those films are available on the CS Film website for people to get those perspectives. We're also involved in the a compassion campaign for Afghan civilians, which is part of how we organize this event today, and is something that through this conversation I hope people will want to further engage and really work with Afghan civil society through the foreseeable future as we continue to assist Afghanistan in its process of stability and development. To briefly introduce the others, Hassina Sherjan is working since 2001 back in Afghanistan. She was a refugee in the United States since 1979 until 2001. She's the founder and chief executive officer of Aid Afghanistan for Education. And Aid Afghanistan for Education, which was founded in 1996, provides primary and secondary education, particularly for those who are deprived of education during the years of the war, and for those who do not currently have access to the formal education system here. Aid Afghanistan for Education is currently teaching 3,000 female students and 104 male students in 9 provinces. Hassina also co-authored a wonderful book, Toughing It Out in Afghanistan. Sitting to her right is Najib Sharifi. And Najib is a medical doctor by profession, but has long been working in the news media. And he is the founder and director of Afghanistan's New Generation organization, which empowers Afghan youth to become competent community advocates. They do this by providing training in such areas as public speaking, media literacy, media production, information technology, and community mobilizing. It's a very important topic, youth development here, because 68% of the population here is under the age of 25. Afghanistan's New Generation organization, the programs include Afghan Voices, which trains young Afghans, provides them with tools to develop media products, including documentary films. And you can see many of those wonderful films on the Afghan Voices site. And an organization that in English means First Street, which helps Afghan street children get into and to stay in school. And to my left is Ikram Afzali, and Ikram returned to Afghanistan in 2004 after 20 years as a refugee in Pakistan. Ikram is a youth advocate and development professional. He's focused on peace building and anti-corruption issues. As a volunteer, he co-founded and served as president, and serves currently as president for Youth in Action Association. And Youth in Action Association organizes sports matches, volunteer community activities, media making work, and fine arts exhibitions, all in an effort to help facilitate tolerance, respect, cooperation, and integrity in a place which, as I'm sure many understand, has dealt with very, very difficult ethnic divisions and ethnic conflict. Ikram works as head of advocacy and communication at Integrity Watch Afghanistan. And Integrity Watch Afghanistan, which was founded in 2005, analyzes and fosters transparency and anti-corruption by engaging both in research and analysis and by training and empowering communities to monitor what's going on in their villages. Things like the quality of reconstruction. Communities are engaged in monitoring that to ensure that the construction is as it should be. They're also involved in monitoring the management of public services and issues like the mining industry. So to start off, I wanted to open it up with a conversation with you three folks about really where civil society is at from your perspective. You know, so many outsiders hear and see about Afghanistan really only from our outside perspective, from the battlefront, from what we as outsiders are doing. And this is a wonderful opportunity to try and overcome some of the, frankly, pessimism that exists in the public, certainly in the United States, from the media that we're getting about the current state of things in Afghanistan. And while we know the situation here is certainly very difficult, and generally I've picked up that the mood right now seems to be one of certain uncertainty, I think it would be really a breath of fresh air if we could go around and if each of you could give us a brief first-hand account of your experiences with how the civil society is growing here and what kind of relevance it's playing in this period of transition. Ikram, perhaps we could start with you. You know, very naively, so many of us on the outside would frankly be forgiven for wondering, based on relative poor information that we get, whether or not Afghans are really doing anything about corruption issues, about governance issues, about development issues. And perhaps from your experience, you could just start us off with some of the work you've been doing and some of your perspective around how the civil society is working.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for providing us the opportunity to talk about the issues that we are facing in Afghanistan and the developments that are taking place here. I think civil society has come a long way since it started its work in the new way. I mean, civil society has been there in different forms, but in more organized form in the modern way. Civil society started to work, I think, during the 80s, and it mostly was providing services because of the gap that the state was not able to provide service to the people. But then after some 2 decades in the new era, after 2001, civil society has gradually been trying to understand its role. And I think civil society recently has been playing a very important role in flagging out some very important issues related to good governance and also about development. The role of civil society has been very positive, in the international events where they raised their concerns about human rights issues and about governance issues. And I think we have had significant achievements as compared to the amount of work that we have done. Recently, in the mining sector, the government published around 200 contracts, and this was something that we as civil society organizations working in the governance sector demanded for quite long, and we raised our voices at different platforms. And now we see that it's producing something. And I mean, civil society has not been very much, something that you can expect a lot from, because it's very new and it's still developing. So, I mean, it will take some more time for civil society to play a role that the other civil society are playing in other countries, like in the US or in Europe. But I think we are learning, and we are learning by doing. And we have achieved so many things in the last few years. But if this process continues, and we still receive a lot of support from our civil society friends in other countries, we will be able to develop on what we have done in the last 1 decade.
Great. Thanks very much. And I know we'll come back to talk more about how this support from the outside and the sustainability of that is very important to the next steps for Afghanistan. Hassina, maybe you could give us your perspective on how issues of education and business development are developing here, particularly for women, but also in general, the entrepreneurial environment, and then the environment for your education work, which is really part of the civil society as you're working on it outside of the formal government education system.
Thank you. Yes, well, for one thing, the real changes will only happen in Afghanistan when the civil society become a pressure. And we're not quite a pressure yet. I think we have a long ways to go, and I think within the next 10, 15 years, civil society will become a pressure. And as far as entrepreneurship and business and then education, there are two separate issues. Education, of course, is the most important issue in Afghanistan, because without education and educating the whole population, we're not going to be able to bring peace, because it's much easier to brainwash people who are illiterate or don't know, or they can't think for themselves. I think this is something that we all should think about and start contributing to how we can educate the whole population and not only focus on children, because the most important thing is that for children to also know we have many students who are 26-year-olds sitting in 10th grade, and when I ask them, why are you coming to school now, they tell me that my husband encourages me to come to school. So there's a wide assumption that Afghan men are all vicious and they're all abusive and they'll beat up their wives or cut their ears and nose off. Well, that's not true, because we see it every day. And of course, violence against women is worldwide. It is not specific to Afghanistan, but at the same time, we have to look at the positive aspects of what is happening here in Afghanistan, because the only thing that we hear in the media and the news are all negative and what goes wrong and who does what and how it is bad, because people are very keen to educating their children. I think we should start developing programs for educating the whole family and how the children and the parents can work together and study, because one of our students, who is in fact a 26-year-old, said that I have 2 kids and my son goes to 1st grade now. He came home and asked me to help him with his homework, and I couldn't because I told him I can't, I'm not literate. And he was very upset because he said that other parents can, and why can't you help me? And after that, I told my husband that whether you want it or not, I have found a program and I'm gonna go study. So now she's very happy. She says, I can work with my children and we're all studying together. So I think this is something that we have to really expand to the rest of the country and educate people. Of course, it is also important for people to have jobs. I mean, the things that we haven't really paid enough attention within the last 10 years is really what first is education and second is jobs. I think we've been wasting too much time on reconciliation and peace processes and all these things that's mainly a distraction for the real work. Because I think once we educate the population and provide them with jobs, there will be peace automatically.
And in terms of jobs, well, one thought I just wanted to get, the issue of illiteracy is a major one, and why is that for Afghanistan? I mean, what has been the issue with illiteracy?
Well, unfortunately, in Afghanistan, we have always had very, we know one UNESCO report said 4% literacy in the 70s in Afghanistan. I think we really have never gone past 10% literacy in Afghanistan. I still don't think that we have over 10% literacy in Afghanistan, because it's not about the number of students who come to school, it's about what they learn, how education takes place. Because even right now with our own programs, we're working really hard to hopefully reform the education system, creating models that can be duplicated by the government and others here in Afghanistan, because it's a rote system. So the students memorize a lot and they repeat it. And that's what we did when we went to high school. And we memorized everything overnight and wrote it down in the exam paper the next day and forgot about it as soon as we came out of the exam. So it's about what they really learn. How can we create thinkers, you know? How can we, because they have to repeat after the teachers and they have to memorize everything. So in Afghanistan, even in the 70s, we still didn't have enough schools for everybody to go to. And we still don't have enough schools for everybody to go to. So there are a lot of these CBEs, which is the community-based schools, and I don't think that's enough. I mean, that's not efficient. I mean, for students to come to a school where they can sit in a classroom, they learn a lot more than just alphabet. So so that's one of the reasons that we still have very high illiteracy in Afghanistan, and mainly because of the fact that they don't have access to education.
Hey, Michael, can I jump? I want to jump in with some of the questions that we're receiving before we get to you, Najib. And this one in particular just fits so much with what you were saying. It's from Janet Powers, who's the professor of interdisciplinary studies and women's gender and sexuality studies at Gettysburg College. And this is her question. It's a short paragraph. I'll ask it in full. My global feminism class and I are concerned about what will happen to women in women's organizations when the U.S. leaves Afghanistan. How can we best support women there and guarantee their rights in the near future and beyond? And I thought that was a macro question that maybe each of you could touch on before we hear more from Najib.
Hassina, would you like to go first?
Yes, sure. I think, first of all, I think it's very important for our friends and the states to understand that life in Afghanistan will not end in 2014. And 2014 is a date that was set by the U.S. government, and Afghans we're not really sitting around thinking about 2014, where we continue our work, and I'm not really worried, and I don't see that worry in our students or in the school or even with our colleagues in the office. There are people, and it's because if you continuously ask people and you talk about it in the media as if 2014 Afghanistan will fall off the map or some horrible thing happened, I think I believe in the power of projection. So if you project something, it will happen. I don't think that we should necessarily we don't even need to project something so negative. I think we should think that, you know, Afghans will come together, and we are all working, in fact. And I really don't believe that the Taliban are coming back to Afghanistan. I mean, that was in specific circumstances, and really there is no room now for the Taliban in Afghanistan.
And would anybody like to pick up this question around concerns about women's issues going forward? Is it going to be a steady path of continuing the civil society and the government work around stabilizing the situation for women? Or how do people feel the next steps or the transition could have an impact?
Let me talk a little bit about this. You know, I would like to start from here. First, you know, I mean, we should contradict the myth that the United States is leaving Afghanistan. They're reducing their, you know, military presence, but that does not necessarily mean that they're going to abandon Afghanistan. And they're not going to do that. They will even have some residual military forces in the country. And secondly, you know, this is a point that is not being raised or has not been raised very often about Afghanistan, particularly when it comes to Western media. Afghanistan has gone through a massive social transformation in the past 10 years. You know, what we experienced before 2001, we don't believe we'll experience that again. It's not because the West is going to reduce its, let's say, military aid or financial aid to Afghanistan. It's because the social transformation that we have had in the country. You know, we are living in a new era. You know, today, if you look at the, you know, the number of youth, you know, the ambitions and the progressive spirit that not only youth but a bigger, you know, portion of the society has, you know, it's incredible. I mean, and this is, I don't want to give the credit to, you know, Afghans themselves. It's the change. It's the change in the era. It's the change in time, and which has affected Afghanistan. And I would like to emphasize on this again that, you know, we need to put aside the negativist, you know, view that we have towards Afghanistan. It's a country where life is going on, you know, already. It's a country, you know, that people work really hard, you know. We've got a very strident, you know, civil society. I don't admit that there aren't challenges. There are numerous challenges ahead, you know. But we have reached a stage that even with, you know, medium level of Western support, we are able to tackle those challenges.
And you want to add to that, Ikram?
Yeah, let me be a little bit pessimistic also, so we balance the optimism from Hassina and Najib. I think, you know, one of the most important issues that Afghanistan is facing is that the corrupt leadership that has been imposed on us over the last 10 years. This is something that is the biggest threat to our future, to development and peace. We don't see, I personally don't see Taliban as a threat in the future, because as Hassina said, they're becoming, day by day, they're becoming irrelevant. But I think the leadership the corrupt leadership that is leading Afghanistan is a threat that can push us back to the same chaos that we were and before 2001. This is something that really has to be taken into account when we talk about 2014, because once the US military forces reduce, there is a chance that these same people who are in power now will do the same things as they did in the 90s. And then people were forced to accept Taliban as a response. These same people who are now in power here in Kabul, they were the same people who killed people on the streets. And now they are, the form of their power has changed. They're not using violence directly and openly as they did in the 90s, but now they have power, and they're in the government offices. They're misusing the power that has been entrusted in them. And if there is a reduction of military forces and a direct pressure from the US and from the foreign countries, there is a chance that these people will start misusing power in a more violent way. So I just wanted to balance the views of Hassina and Najib here.
Najib.
I have sorry, Ikram. I have very radically different view, on this particular issue. And I don't want to talk about, I don't want to bring in other factors, but I would like to just highlight one economic factor, that will prevent these people to go back to the days that we experienced, in Kabul and the rest of the country, And it's mainly an economic reason, These people, those who are on power, let's say the warlords, they have huge businesses in the country now, and their businesses can sustain only in the presence of peace and stability. And just for this mere reason, they will not resort to violence, because stability in the country will serve their interests, will enable them to make money,
Yeah, because
let's hope that. Oh, go ahead, Hassina, please.
Because previously it was a business for them to fighting was a business, and now fighting will not be a business anymore. So
I think this is, a good optimism. I mean, we could look historically and worry about the 50s and 60s, which also saw very good economic development and business development. And then, unfortunately, because of the geopolitics of the situation, which I think has to be acknowledged, that there's a lot of pressure on Afghanistan that is not responsibility internally, that is being put on the country from the regional powers and from the international power plays that are going on. But that aside, let's hope that these and many other factors like business are going to contribute to this kind of stability. But Najib, maybe we could come back to your perspective on a little bit broader on what is going on with the youth and what you're experiencing with your organization in terms of how youth is taking a leadership position, especially in a culture in which notions of seniority and respect for elders is so important.
Well, let me start from here, Michael. As you introduced me in the beginning, I'm a physician by profession, so some audiences may be asking, what is he doing here? Or what does he have to do with youth empowerment, and civil society activities? I would like to start from here, We're in a very critical and important juncture of history. I call it important and critical because the change in time and era has produced, a massive youth in not only in Afghanistan but also in the region, with massive ambitions, with massive spirit of progressiveness, and with massive desire to change, Afghanistan has been, a backward country, third world country, a lot of things have been very primitive. But today, when they see, the world through internet or through televisions, or other means of, accessing information, they don't want to live without power. They don't want to live in a situation where they don't have, any means or any facilities in this modern world. So this has created a huge desire on the part of the youth for change. Again, not only in Afghanistan, but also in the entire region. We witnessed the examples of our Arab Spring, that. So the reason that I wanted to get involved was that it's the right time to introduce change in the country through empowering the youth, because these are the forces that are going to provide the viable and sustainable solution for the future of Afghanistan, a future that we want that's progressive, that's democratic, a democratic Afghanistan, a progressive Afghanistan, a peaceful and secure Afghanistan, because this is the natural and organic way, to achieving those objectives. And, talking about the organization that I'm working with and the youth, it's, as you introduced, we have used that, we empower the youth from all across the country by providing them training in different areas. And one of the main areas is media, because the reason we chose media is because in a country where a lot of respect has to be given to the seniors, to the elders, the best way to amplify the voices of the youth is the media, because let's say if I make, or one of my colleagues makes short documentary, a story, it reaches out to millions of people. So, trainings have been a means for us, but the most important objective of, the organization, me and my colleagues, is mobilizing, youth around civic and volunteer initiatives with the bigger objective of these youth becoming a visible force in the country.
Right. Great. Ikram, I'm wondering from your perspective with the your organization, the volunteer organization, how you're seeing the youth impact the stability or the transformation.
I think I totally agree with what Najib has said about youth. The only hope that we can have for a change in Afghanistan, and the force that we can expect that will bring this change is youth. We have a very good experience of working in some very tough areas of Afghanistan where there is ongoing conflict, for example, in the southeast and eastern region. We have been working with youth. When we talk about issues that they're facing and the desire that they have, peace is something that everyone is looking for, and they're thirsty for peace, and they want to do something for peace. While the elders have become, throughout like the 30 years of war and the continuing conflict has made them very pessimistic, but youth are very optimistic about future. Nevertheless, there are challenges, and one has to take into account the challenges and also the problems that might happen after 2014. But there is this desire that gives us hope, and I think this is something that we need to develop on as Afghans. And I see this commitment and young people like Najib and myself and Hassina and other people that I meet in not only in the center but also in the rural areas where people are now connected, as Najib was saying, to the world through TV, through internet, and they're seeing that the world is changing. So they also have this desire for peace and development, and they welcome our initiatives. When we go to them, we use sport as a vehicle for peace building, and when we organize these events, youth come in and they tell us their experiences, and when we talk to them and we give them our experiences, and when we give them explanations about values of peace and how sport links, the values of sport linked to peace and all that, they take that very positively, and after a while, when we go back to them and we talk to them about their experiences of how they feel the change because of the commitment that they make with us for the values of peace. We hear stories that are very encouraging. For example, recently, there were two villages in the eastern region of Afghanistan who had enmities with each other, and we tried to organize some sport events for them. That led to more communication between these communities, and also that atmosphere of communicating with each other led you to think about bringing peace and resolving issues through dialogue, through talking, and that shows that there is this desire and this willing for working for peace among you, not only in the center but also in the rural areas, and where we think people are still developing. They already know a lot about how to bring change to their societies, but to expect a big change overnight would be something unrealistic, and also to expect that these small activities by civil society like us, or like the one Najib is doing or Hassina is doing, will transform Afghanistan in the coming 1 or 2 years is really would be really unrealistic. What is important is that you provide civil society like us an enabling environment where they can work and bring change. Of course, we also have a role to provide that enabling environment for ourselves. But it is important that you take into account this broader political situation that we are in. And I think that's very important, that the next elections is done in a proper way, and we have a true leadership of Afghans, not a leadership that is corrupt, the leadership that has failed, the leadership that has misused power over the last decade and before that even. So for that we need to work, and we also need support from civil society outside Afghanistan to raise their voices for transitional justice, for banning these killers to become our leaders. So if you don't do that, you will not be able to make this enabling environment for civil society to transform the society as a whole.
Hey, I have a question, Michael, and everyone, and it's actually it's a question we received online. And just a reminder, if you do have a question, send it to questions@afsc.org and list your name if you'd like me to use your name. But I wanted to talk about something. This question refers to something you mentioned, Najib, and sort of the influence of the Arab Spring and the revolutions taking place the last few years. And I'm wondering if each of you could maybe talk a little bit about the impact that those ideas have had in Afghanistan. I want you to know that particularly around Egypt, it was the first time in my life where the media in this country actually looked at nonviolent change and actually held up the voices of young people in particular in Tunisia and in Egypt. And there was actually some dialogue in this country about the power of nonviolence and the power of people-led movements. And so I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, and also maybe put it in the context of were the the green revolution in Iran, did that have a bigger impact? Does what's happening in Pakistan and India have a bigger impact? Or do you actually feel something from the power of those revolutions that are expanding in the Arab world right now?
Anybody like to take the lead on that? Please, Hassina.
Well, first of all, for me, it wasn't really the first time because I saw this in Indonesia when I was there when Suharto stepped down. When I saw 2,000 youth actually removing the very large door of the parliament, literally lifting it up and asking for Suharto to step down. And that is really, it was an incredible feeling, that realizing that yes, this can happen, and it always does happen when there is a dictatorship. And dictators never really last forever. They have 32 years, 27 years. So obviously, people, it always gets to the point where people realize that what is it that they want. But it's also very strange that in certain cases, like for example in South Korea, there was a need for a dictatorship for a period of time because they didn't really make it with the democracy. So this democracy that we have in Afghanistan, it makes me wonder sometimes if this will really survive, because it's a democracy that we didn't bring upon ourselves. We don't own it. The ownership of this democracy is not really with the Afghans. They don't really feel like this is what they really want, or they don't even understand it. We have an economic system that is not really owned by the Afghans. The Afghans don't really understand this economic system. We've had a socialist system for a very long time in Afghanistan. It has nothing to do with the Russians being in Afghanistan. If you look at the market here, all the fruit stands are all next to one another, and all the bread shops are next to one another. All the bakeries are all one next to another, because we've never really had this competition, and they don't really understand it. There has always been a price control system here in Afghanistan. So suddenly to take that away and bring something else that people don't really recognize, it's very difficult for Afghans who are really struggling with this economic system right now. And then there are no regulations, so we have basically become a dumping ground for all of our neighbors. So it worries me that how can we produce our own products today at my little factory, Bumi, where we're trying to produce something with raw material from Afghanistan. We're suffering because the textile factory that was giving us producing the cotton for us said we're not going to anymore because it's too expensive, and you are the only customer we have, because the fabric that's coming from China and Pakistan are much cheaper, and we have all these textile factories that are dormant in Afghanistan with thousands of machinery in there. So how can we activate all of this and put thousands of people back to work if we don't have regulations? And the focus has been how to become a member of WTO before we even have an economy of our own. So there are all sorts of issues here, and I'm sure that when revolutions happen in other Muslim countries, it automatically impacts people in all of the Muslim countries, realizing that yes, we as a people can make a difference. We do have power. Unfortunately, again, lack of education is a huge obstacle here for Afghanistan. Egyptians have a much, much higher literacy rate. Of course, I don't exactly know the percentage, but even in Iraq, Iraq has a 100% literacy rate. So we have a very long ways to go. We really have to focus on education.
Well, I would like to briefly talk about that, Peter. And actually, looking back into my own experience with the youth, youth groups started taking form in Afghanistan around 2009, you know. And the reason that it happened in 2009 was, I believe this was because of the frustration the youth witnessed, both with regards to the Afghan government and the international community. Both of them failed to deliver what the youth desired to see in Afghanistan. So they wanted to take the matter in their own hands, you know. So in all parts of the country, you know, youth groups started forming and connecting and talking about Afghanistan, talking about ways to contribute to peace and prosperity in Afghanistan. And specifically on your question, the Arab Spring had a prominent impact on the youth, on inspiring the youth, you know, in the country. It's because we have a very vibrant media in Afghanistan today. We have more than 50, you know, private TV stations, more than 100 radio stations, and you know, more than 100, you know, newspapers, magazines, and other kinds of publications. So, you know, in the light of the fact that this spirit had already, you know, come into existence on the part of the youth of Afghanistan, what happened in the Arab world greatly inspired them. You know, they started talking about this stuff, and I remember that they would even, you know, dozens of Facebook groups were created, you know, to bring the youth on the streets of Kabul. Well, it was a bit premature, you know, to be honest. But this shows, you know, the impact of the revolution, the Arab Revolution in Afghanistan. And the politicians, you know, started becoming fearful. And I've written an article specifically on this. You know, if you Google my name, it was published on NPR, Najib Sharifi, you know, Arab Spring, you can find it. Again, I would like to go back to my previous point. You know, anything that happens in this region and beyond, considering the fact that we are living in the area of information and technology, it does leave its impact on each other, you know, and it has left its impact on Afghan youth. Well, we need to be realistic, and we need to keep in mind, you know, that there are challenges in Afghanistan, you know, ahead of probably a movement at this stage. It may be premature because of the fact that we have got several deterring, you know, forces in the country, and political stability is not as strong in Afghanistan as it's in the Arab countries. But definitely, you know, what happens in the region leaves its impact on Afghanistan, and I'm pretty hopeful and optimistic that soon we are going to witness a massive transformation in the entire region, which will give the matter to the hands of the forces of change and the forces of progress, rather than the old-minded and corrupt and bureaucrats.
That optimism is clearly around, and I can feel this sense. One of the questions I have, however, is for each of us being realistic about the incredible tensions that Afghanistan has faced over the last 30 years, and really the severity of the ethnic conflict. It's such a different environment than so many of the other places where the Arab Spring has been taking its roots, where there was a singular obstacle perhaps. The complexities here of people's divisions, often the lack of unity. And the other issue I'd like to bring up is the big difference between the rural and the urban here. I mean, we're still dealing with an 80% agrarian society. And I would like you all to speak somewhat realistically about the long-term nature of development and stability and healing that Afghanistan has to face. Ikram, maybe you would like to?
Yeah, I think you've touched a very, very important point. We have been suffering from conflict since, very violent conflict since 80s. And nobody talks about healing the wounds. Nobody talks about all the warlords and the killers who have been misusing power, who have been torturing Afghans, and who did not lose any opportunity
face accountability
to torture Afghans and to use their violent force for preserving their control and their power. Now, even since after 2001, the biggest mistake I think which was made was to bring these same people to the positions of power. The biggest mistake was to leave transitional justice aside. Because if you don't punish these people, or if you don't do a national reconciliation where people feel that, you know, the tortures that they have faced, all the hardships that they have faced, there are people who care about them, who try to heal their wounds and try to resolve their issues and the conflict that they have at the local level, at the national level. So this feeling was there, and nobody really seriously took this and tried to bring it to a level where people feel that, okay, now we are trying to start a new era, a new beginning, and what has happened in the past, we'll not forget it, but we'll forgive. That didn't happen in Afghanistan, and still people are suffering from this. And this perpetual cycle of conflict is continuing just because of that. You have to put a full stop somewhere. You have to say, okay, those who have done wrong will face the results of what they have done, or maybe people in Afghanistan, maybe they completely forgive them, right? But that didn't happen. What happened was that these warlords were brought into positions of power, and then it was expected that these same corrupt people will build a democracy that will deliver to the people. I mean, I can't understand this, and the same thing is going to happen again and again, and unless this changes, and I think Afghans will definitely change this, but this is not going to happen, I think this is not going to happen in the next decade. This will transform, and we might see a lot of ups and downs, a lot of violent conflicts also, but this is eventually going to change for Afghans. But if we want to really change this quickly and to decrease the collateral damage of it, we need to think as a whole, like the international community, the Afghans, sit together and try to find solution to this. Put a full stop to the wrongdoings that has been done in the last 3 or 4 decades, and try to start a new beginning with new faces, and then we can expect that the society will gear up the transformation, and we'll see something that I think we have the potential for the economic side of it. We just discussed that, and I think we have enormous opportunities in Afghanistan in terms of economy, because we have a lot of mining. It is a potential for development, and it's a risky. It has a lot of risk also. But if you leave these same people in the positions of power, they're going to misuse it, and it's going to result in more violence. But if you have clean people using these resources, these same resources can bring development to the people.
Yeah, I think it was very striking to me that the divisions here are so clear, and that often the opportunities for crossing the ethnic divisions are quite difficult. When I was involved in the training, something that struck me immensely was that when I asked people to evaluate each week the training, and there was a group of people that were from different ethnic groups, women and men mixed in the same group. One of the most dominant responses that came back was what an incredible multicultural experience it was. And I think it's often very hard for outsiders to realize how divided Afghanistan is and how long it's going to take to heal that and to start to build the bridges, which is, I think, what each of you in different ways is involved in, this long, slow process. How can Afghans take more responsibility for that, and how can outsiders really contribute to this in the long term? Yeah, Hassina.
I think what has really not happened in the last 10 years is the people-to-people connection and the relationship has not been built, because we've left way too much responsibility for the government. And government, as corrupt as it is, and I do agree with Ikram that it is very corrupt, but and we all know that, and I'm not really expecting overnight change either, and I'm not expecting a change even in 2014 election. But it is a lot of work, and we as Afghans have to come together and decide what is it that we want. What kind of a system do we want? What kind of a government system do we want? What kind of political system? What kind of economic system do we want? And then only changes will happen, because we will make it happen. So as far as the relationship with the outside world and our international partners, I think it's crucial to have a dialogue, to start even a dialogue, to find out more about Afghan people. To even understand the Afghan people, and looking at the international community here in Afghanistan, it surprises me to see that they have a lot of recipes for everything, but they never ask questions and they don't listen. So because they're here for a very short period of time and they want to change everything overnight yesterday. And because they don't have time, their own internal elections are coming up and they have to show something. Well, it doesn't work that way. When you're involved with something, a country like Afghanistan who has gone through years of war, and we have a lot of work to do. We need support, but how do you support somebody? If somebody's sick, you want to know what is it that they need, Afghanistan has become like a cancer patient who has accidentally survived, and now there are way too many recipes and too many doctors giving everything they can, rather than listening to what is it this patient wants, maybe, and carrying the patient around rather than allowing it to walk on its own. So I think listening and talking to people, finding out more about Afghanistan. I was just in the US and I was speaking at some universities and colleges and high schools where people really had no clue. Everybody said that Afghanistan is a desert and there's a war. So I think it's crucial to really stay connected and talk to people, and also support for education again,
I have a couple of points. I would like to be very brief, because I can see, Peter, that you have another question. Michael, it's yes, certainly, there are things that the Afghan government and the international community can do, to alleviate this problem of ethnic fragmentation in this country. Well, firstly, I should say that it's not something unique to Afghanistan. We have this almost in all over the world, where we have different ethnicities living in the same country. But secondly, as Hassina rightly mentioned, in the past there has not been the grounds for them to connect, to interact, to talk, and to exchange. Because these is, at the end of the day, these things that led to fostering understanding, But today in Afghanistan, again, I would like to point out to the importance and values of the changing world. You know, more than 80% of Afghans use cell phones today. It didn't exist 10 years ago. I remember 10 years ago when I would like to make a call to a province, you know, I had to go to the center of Kabul, to the Ministry of Information, you know, and find a bureaucrat there, you know, and, you know, give him some money. Well, I don't know whether it was legitimate or illegitimate to make a call to a province, but today, you know, you can just, no matter what time of the day or night it is, you know, or where you are, you can make a call. This itself is a change that leads to fostering understanding between different ethnic groups. Today, the amount of roads that we have in this country, never ever in the history of Afghanistan we have had the number of roads that we have today in the country. This obviously, you know, creates the opportunity for more interaction by, you know, by facilitating transportation to different parts of the country, you know, and the country is opening up. And on top of these things, we are living in a globalized and globalizing world today, you know. So globalizing world, obviously, which stands basically on the pillars of interest, washes out, you know, the old primitive, you know, instincts and values that a lot of people in the third world countries have been clinging to, you know. These are genuine and legitimate sources of hope for the future of the country. And coming back and being realistic, today we have problems, we have a lot of problems, but these are genuine sources of hope and realities that we have that gives us the hope that will change.
What? Yeah. Peter, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have. We've gotten a couple questions on one theme, so I want to throw it out for you. And one is from a colleague of yours who you may recognize, Hakim, with a group called Afghan Peace Volunteers. And the question, there's a couple questions, but I think it all points to some of the issues you have already raised. And here are the questions from the Afghan Peace Volunteers. Negotiations between the U.S. and Afghan governments are underway to determine the number of U.S. forces that will remain in Afghanistan after 2014. Are these negotiations held according to the wishes of the American and Afghan public? And how can we determine the American and Afghan public opinion on the long-term presence of U.S. troops in Afghanistan? And as you respond to that question, I want you to also maybe share a little bit about what Hassina raised and the need for people-to-people exchange, because I am a firm believer that in order for us as advocates in the United States to be successful, we need a message of attraction and having to come from what Afghans are doing. So again, the question is, what is going on with the negotiations right now between the U.S. and Afghan governments on troop levels, and maybe a few more thoughts that each of you might have on ways that you in particular or your group in particular would like to see more people-to-people dialogue with people in the United States.
Can I? Well, I think this people-to-people relations is key to building understanding, not only between people from Afghanistan and the US, but even between people within Afghanistan, because you have all these divided communities and divided regions. You need to bring them together. But I would like to raise the point again that when power is in the hands of corrupt and those who have misused it for years, when you expect them to deliver and when you expect them to bring people together, they won't do that simply. And they did not do it in the last decade. What happened, you know, that they even, there were some political entrepreneurs who entered the stage as well. But with these warlords, they try to use people against each other just for their political gain. And if this continues, I mean, I see that civil society can do something, but I see that even in the civil society there is a lot of divide. I see that there are people who might appear to be very broad-minded and trying to accept others, but when you go deep into their issues, and there might be good reasons for it as well, you see a lot of divide between these people. And I think what is important is that the civil society understand its role, and it will do something which will result in the long term. But if you want to see changes in the short term, which is important, I think, just to give us an environment where we can work with, it is important that you think about these big political changes. And I think here comes the importance of relations between people in Afghanistan and the US, that the US public, if they have more contacts with Afghans, and if we have more contacts with the people in the US, we will be able to influence policies that are followed by the US administration in Afghanistan. Because it's not about number of troops that we leave here. It's about what policies you're going to follow in the next years. If the same policies are going to be followed, and let me just give you an example of one of the governors in the eastern Afghanistan. He's one of the most corrupt people. Wall Street Journal recently published a report about them, and they interviewed US officials here. They said that this guy is making a lot of illegal money from a development fund, so-called development fund, and why are you not doing anything about it? He said the official reply was that it's not a red line for us. He's on our side, and he's supporting our policies here, so it's not a red line for us. Now that sends a very, very negative signal to the Afghan people. Now, for the U.S. administration, does it mean that somebody who robs people, Afghan people, but still stands at the side of U.S. administration is somebody that should be supported by the U.S.? That's something that people really are becoming more and more pessimistic about future of international intervention in Afghanistan, because they think that whoever comes in Afghanistan, they have their own agenda, and they're only interested to follow their own agenda. They're not interested about listening to the people. They're not interested about what people want. So if these changes do not happen, I think this pessimism will continue, and it would reach a level where we will say, okay, leave us alone, and we will do whatever we want to do. I think we still have some hope left, and I think in the next couple of years, this trend has to change.
And coming back to this question, well, Hassina, go right ahead.
I just wanted to say something about the U.S.-Afghan agreement and on the troops, because I think it's crucial right now to make sure that the Afghan troops, as it is right now, I don't believe that they're really capable of protecting Afghanistan, and mainly because we've created a model that is not sustainable for Afghanistan. I think we need the troops here, the international troops here, we need the NATO here, until we develop a military system that is for Afghanistan and it will be sustainable. Because this system, Afghanistan will never be able to pay its soldiers. We already had a system, and that system should have been improved rather than bringing in an American system into Afghanistan. We don't have this system anywhere in this whole region. We need a system more like maybe an Indian system, a model. We have to model Afghan military from what it was before, in fact, and just improve that rather than bringing in something which will depend us on America forever. We will never be a sovereign country if our military is paid by America.
And I've interviewed a lot of folks over the last month about this issue of security, and of course it's a major issue in terms of the American public's perspective on this and concerns about it. But I'm interested from the three of you, because you know, I've heard opinions all over the map in terms of, you know, we need to take full responsibility ourselves and the international troops are the problem, to this opinion about, you know, we need a long-term, sustained, consistent support as the Afghan security system is stabilized and improved. Some people have expressed a feeling like this is going to be a good opportunity, actually, if the international community pulls back and the Afghan both civil society, government, and security systems have to fill that vacuum, frankly, and have to basically step up and deal. How do you folks feel about these different possibilities?
Let me, well, again, I'll try to be brief about this issue. Michael, you know, if you look at the bigger picture today, our vulnerability mainly emanates from our political instability rather than our military or army, you know. I mean, we don't have a bigger concern about that. Well, probably the number will reduce or increase, but, you know, the reason that we need a symbolic presence of the international, mainly US forces in Afghanistan, is because that's the main component of support for the political stability in Afghanistan. You know, considering the fact that our political stability is very, very fragile. You know, that's my biggest concern. You know, and secondly, you know, because people's perceptions and expectations have not been managed efficiently and effectively. A lot of people in the country in Afghanistan see, you know, the presence of Afghanistan in the map today, justifiably or not, in the presence of the international, you know, forces in the country. Again, I repeat that this may not be justified, this perception of the people, but at the end of the day, it's perception of the people. I can do more about that. I mean, you can do more, I mean, a lot about that. So, I would like to summarize it by saying that we need a symbolic presence of the international forces in the country, probably for another 10 years, 15 years, you know, saying, you know. And in the meantime, we need to empower our political institutions so that we reach the optimum level of, you know, or optimum ingredients for the political stability in Afghanistan. And this needs to be coupled with a very, you know, programmatic and smart, you know, package of managing people's perceptions and expectations.
You know, I have the concern that for many, there's too little understanding about both extremes. On the one hand, from my perspective, I think the transformations that have happened in Afghanistan because of Afghans and because of assistance from the outside are really quite remarkable. I mean, considering what was happening in 2001 and for 3 decades before that in terms of really destruction of the fabric of society, the lack of any kind of actual government system, the total instability, you know, it has to be acknowledged that there have been remarkable transformations in the last 10 years. At the same time, we have to also acknowledge that the situation is still very, very fragile. And that if we don't acknowledge that, then we're not going to actually deal effectively with what should happen. I think the international community, quite frankly, had way too high expectations in terms of what could be accomplished in Afghanistan, sort of this idea of sort of flipping Afghanistan from one state to another. And unfortunately, we're in a state right now, there's a certain amount of burnout in terms of people's willingness to continue their support and their willingness to stay engaged. And so we have a major problem in terms of sustainable support for Afghanistan. My concern is, how are we going to actually move away from a combat presence of the international community here towards a stabilization and peacekeeping presence that is both facilitated by the Afghans themselves and actually engaged with by the international community? What is your thought about this issue? Anyone? Hassina?
Yes, well, for one thing, pulling back and pulling out are two different things for me. I think pulling back is maybe not a bad idea. Pulling out might be a bad idea right now. And I think that, yes, I mean, giving the Afghan forces the space to do it themselves and to experience and to learn, but to be there as a support, I think, is crucial at the moment. As Najib John said, I mean, the political instability in Afghanistan is not going to change for the next 15 years. But I can also sense the frustration of the international community and the people in the United States and the people around the world, that to get out of Afghanistan because it's a failed project. Well, it can be a failed project if we want to look at it that way. And it's also, I think it's partially because people don't get involved in what the governments of their countries are doing. Why America is in Afghanistan, everybody forgot. And it's a lot easier to forget what happened in September 11 until the next September 11 happened, and then we wake up again. And then another 10 years of some chaos, and then after that we forget. Okay, well, Bin Laden is killed, and now there's going to be peace. No, I don't think so. I really don't feel like this is an Afghan war. This is an American war fought in Afghanistan, unfortunately, as it happened before. This is the second time that Afghans are becoming a victim and fighting an American war in Afghanistan. This is not an Afghan war. So if America doesn't fight this war here, they're going to fight it somewhere else. Hopefully, very soon, Afghans will get it together. We're going to have peace in Afghanistan for ourselves, But unfortunately, sadly, America will have to fight this war somewhere else in the world. So I think unless people get involved in their own countries and what their own people are doing, and why the governments are doing what they're doing and do something about it. This is not going to end by pulling out from Afghanistan. It means nothing.
I hope I'm not unpopular, but I would like to again try to agree, Michael, because the reason I wanted this as a topic is because I often, face this question from the Americans, and the rest of the Western nationals. And, my response to them is that, why did you guys come here in the first place? I was able to live here under the Taliban, but if God forbid something happens, and we have, let's say, civil war, coming back of the Taliban, which I don't believe, will happen, I won't be able to live here. I will be the first person who would be slaughtered in Afghanistan. I understand that you guys are frustrated, that the West, mainly the Americans, are frustrated with this war, but we need to think about a responsible exit. They need to think about, the people who live in this country. Again, I would like to raise my own example, and I hope I do not look selfish that I'm not going to be able to live in this country, and I would love to live in this country. This is my country. This is where I was born and brought up, This is the moral side of the case, And there is the practical side of the case, which is the fact that, a lot of people in the West have not realized the grave consequences that lack of accomplishment of this mission will lead to. If you believe it or not, this war comes down to a war of ideologies, and the West, if they pull out of Afghanistan, and what impression it would send, what signal it would send, it will obviously be perceived as their failure in Afghanistan, as their defeat in Afghanistan by a lot of extremist forces, What will it lead to? It will embolden them, to wage this jihad, this war, beyond the borders of Afghanistan, and beyond the borders of this region, Again, the biggest problem, the biggest challenge and risk of today's world is, extremism and terrorism, and so the West cannot underestimate the dangers of this evil and dark phenomenon.
We need to talk about the causes rather than the symptoms anymore. Because I think the easiest thing is to look at the symptom, we have a headache, take some Advil, it goes away, never really recognizing where that headache came from. So, it's the easiest thing is to get out and take a leave for a while, but not really discussing it's never a dialogue why we are where we are right now in the world. Nobody wants to even start this dialogue.
Ikram wanted to get in. I just want to say we have 5 minutes. And Ikram wanted to comment on this last topic, and then I think it would also be very worthwhile to come back to this topic of what individuals can be doing from your perspective outside of Afghanistan to effectively support what you think is needed moving forward. But first, Ikram.
And Michael, before we can go beyond the 11:30, so you don't have to rush your comment completely. But let's say an extra 5 or 10 minutes is fine, and then we can answer that important second question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. I think on the exit, we need to think as a whole, as the Afghan people, as the American people. We need to think both about opportunities and also the risks of what is going to happen if the exit happens or the exit doesn't happen. I think if the U.S. administration continues with the same policies, I don't care where they leave tomorrow or they leave after 10 years. Because the same situation will continue. But if the policies change, I think there is room for, there is this need for the foreign forces, but you also need to think that this existence of the Western forces puts a lot of negative perception into the minds of the people, while in the last 10 years this did not work. How people can think that it will work in the next decade. So what is important is that you come up with new solutions. I mean, we shouldn't be stuck with this, Western forces' ability to bring stability into Afghanistan. We can think of options of bringing UN peacekeepers from countries that people have more acceptance for. For example, from Turkey or from Bangladesh, from other countries, under the peacekeeping forces, and you start a national reconciliation, and a national reconciliation not based on bringing everyone and sacrificing justice for peace, but really to heal the wounds of those who have been affected by the conflict, and then brushing aside those people who have been misusing power, who have been misusing power for their political gain. This is, I think, the way forward. We need American people to stand by our side, pushing their administration to change their policies of not supporting these warlords, and trying to find solutions of bringing UN peacekeepers from countries that are more acceptable to the Afghan people. Then we can think of the next decade of real transformation. And I think Afghanistan, because of its situation, because of its resources, untapped resources, has the potential to become one of the leading countries in the region contributing to the world's peace.
And this brings up, one of personally my great frustrations is, why is this issue from the Afghan perspective not more dominant? Why don't we have more conversation in Afghanistan about a transition away from a combat role for the international community and more towards a robust stabilization process? And I think it comes back to the question that was asked earlier about what should be happening and what kind of pressure should be happening from within Afghanistan on these negotiations between the American government and the Afghanistan government about what's going to happen to NATO and the U.S. forces. I think that there's really a question about why, and I'm asking perhaps naively, but why cannot Afghanistan be expecting more of a role for the UN, for the OCI, for other international organizations that could be providing culturally sensitive stabilization forces? It just seems to me that unless we start, as you've said, moving in that direction, we can't get away from an environment of combat rather than an environment of healing and stabilization. Hassina.
On the practical side of how people can get involved in doing something, because I think once we do something about a problem, then we feel better already. So if people can definitely get involved in educating Afghan people in Afghanistan, and that is one thing which is very rewarding. And if they want to sponsor students, please. I do want people to get in touch with us, aidafghanistanforeducation.org. It's $1 per day per student. They can sponsor students, they can be in touch with the students, they can, we can send them a profile of the students, pictures, information about their lives and what they do, and it would be a great way for them to learn about the life of the Afghans, and they can write to each other and find out about how they live and what they do and how they can support them.
And do the others have ideas in terms of community-based work that could be engaged with by individuals internationally?
I would like to talk about youth in action. I mean, the national issues are so many that sometimes we forget about the little important work that we are doing with the communities. I think for the long-term transformation, the community work has to continue, and initiatives that we are doing, like Youth in Action Association, we need support from people and the US to continue this type of work that we are doing. With little support, we can do a lot here to transform communities from conflict into peace. And I think when we work with these communities, we find a lot of young potential leaders, which we can nurture over time and expect that they will bring changes in their region and their communities also. What is also important is that initiatives like Youth in Action Association, we've been advocating on different platforms about this political transformation and also this transitional justice. This needs support, both moral and also financial support from people in the US. We want to remain independent. We don't want to become like NGOs looking for money from donors, which sometimes they may have conflicting interests and conflicting agendas. So we need independent people to support us to continue the work that we are doing.
I have a point before we, I'm hoping you have something also, Najib, but while we still have some folks on the line and listening, I really want to thank all of you in Kabul for spending some time with us, and want you to know that as we distribute copies of this discussion, I will make sure that there's links to all of the organizations that you're mentioning so that people will have a way to sort of, they'll have a way to follow up. And I just personally want to say, that you have raised some really big issues for us to think about in this country. I am of the belief that we are in the United States emerging from sort of a lost decade, that we were incapable of making the type of changes that should have taken place in this country after 9/11. And Hassina, I think you're right. We're fighting our wars in Afghanistan. But I want to just mention to everyone, the ideas that you've brought to us on the need for social transformation, the need to look at jobs and education, the need to look at transitional justice, and Michael, your work with bringing Afghan voices to us are critical. And I think maybe, if nothing else, maybe we'll decide at the end of this call that each of those topics deserve another type of dialogue with Afghans, maybe with you again or maybe others. But I do want to thank you all deeply for giving us your time and experience, and also give you a few last minutes to have final thoughts and share with people.
Unfortunately, Ikram has to run because he has to be to a TV station for another interview. But the others of us can continue. But I want to thank you as well so much for coming.
Thank you, Michael, to you. Thanks to Peter for providing us this opportunity. And I sincerely hope that we'll continue this discussion in the coming months. And I wish everyone best of luck.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Najib, did you have any further thoughts in terms of either engagement or in terms of a wrap?
In terms of what?
In terms of how individuals can engage and support initiatives here?
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, I mean, you know, the good thing is that, well, let me start from here, you know. Although I hate pointing out a lot of this fact about Afghanistan, but again, I think it deserves, you know. Yeah, I'll try to make it brief, but excuse me if I go long, you know. So we should bear in mind, you know, that this country has not emerged out of war yet. You know, we are still in conflict, but we should appreciate, you know, the changes, the positive changes that we have had in Afghanistan in the past 10 years. And I would like to sincerely and profoundly thank the American people for the generous support that they have provided to Afghans, you know. I mean, we Afghans, we don't forget, you know, the help that you have provided to us, and we are going to be appreciative of what you have done to do. Well, I should also mention that the U.S. government has made numerous mistakes, you know, but we can forgive that. So, you know, the good thing is that...
You said forget or forgive?
Forgive. Yes. Is the good thing these days I can see, and as we are kind of evolving, you know, that the society is evolving, new, you know, discourses on different topics and issues, and mainly topics that involve national issues, are kind of beginning in the country, in different parts of the country, and among different layers of the society. So, but still, you know, for example, what we have in the United States, you know, I mean, the engagement of people about shaping and launching discourses on big national issues, we don't have it in Afghanistan, but you know, a new trend is beginning in the country, which could lead into a bigger discourse, and that could lead into a stage to make recommendations about big national issues. You know, I'm referring, Mike, to your earlier point about, you know, the people's involvement or recommendations or engagements in national stabilization issues. Again, I do not have, like, at this stage, you know, currently a very solid idea as to how it could be done, but the best way, I believe, is expansion of the discourse that has already started, which would become a pressure on the government and which will get to a level to make solid recommendations to the government.
Thank you. I mean, I think we should wrap it up, but it does strike me constantly that for many of us, I think, who don't get to come to Afghanistan, it's very hard to understand how much actually is going on, how much is actually moving forward, and I think it's very important for all of us to maintain that perspective that, yes, there are many problems, but there have also been many steps taken in the right direction, but that it is a very complex situation, that we do need time, we do need sustainable support, and not just on the military or the stability side, in all kinds of humanitarian and development sides, and as Hassina has kept reminding us, of course, most fundamentally around the transformation of education. And I hope people will go back to their own communities and really promote the idea that Afghanistan is not something to be completely frustrated about, that it is something that we can find ways to be very effectively helpful over the long term, and that we need to, that it's in our interest and certainly in this region's interest and in every Afghan's interest that we take the moral and the humanitarian responsibility to stay committed and to find the right kind of paths. Thank you. I think, Peter, I'll send it back to you, and I think we can wrap it up.
Super. Well, one of the privileges of actually having control of the mailbox that gets all the questions is that lots of people have been saying how appreciative they are, and so I want you all to hear that. And again, Najib and Hassina, thank you so much, and Michael, for making time. We'll make a copy of this recording available, and we will make sure that there's lots of links for people to remain engaged.
Thank you very much.
Have a good evening.
Have a good day.
Have a nice day.
All right, thank you.
Hope to talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye there.
Bye.